This is Studio 809.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Outdoors Hiking Bob podcast. I am your host, Hiking Bob Falcone. You can find me on my website at hikingbob.com, which has links to my social media accounts, my columns at the Colorado Springs Independent, also my podcast, my photography website, my, just about anything. You name it, it's on there, hikingbob.com. Easiest way to find me with links to everything, all of it right there. We like to call that one-stop shopping, something along those lines. Today, it'll just be me giving Kevin, my co-host, Wild Westendorf, the day off. And this is going a little late. And let me explain we're going to talk about what the topic is and why this is pretty late in getting out. But I didn't want to miss it. So, last week, I was away on a trip that was almost 3 years in the making. And I just checked the date. I reserved this trip that I took, and we'll talk about what that trip is, back on December 18th of 2019. Give you an idea how long this trip is going to take. And then it was supposed to occur. Later. So basically what has happened was I did a trip with National Geographic to the Great Bear Rainforest last week. And this was a trip. This was the first time National Geographic had done it. And to give you kind of an idea what happens here is National Geographic has their researchers and stuff like that. Those are the people you see on their TV programs, and they'll go out there and hunt for wild whatever it is. And I say hunt to research. They don't hunt for hunting purposes, but they go out there to hunt for to hunt for wild animals, exotic adventures, things like that. What I went on is let me see if I can come up with the name of it. It is basically I don't want to say it's a cruise ship. We're on a ship, but they're not talking about these 12-story tall, 4,000 people things that you see with Carnival or Disney Cruise Lines or anything like that. So small boats. I think we had 70 guests on board the boat. And what the goal of this was to go to the Great Bear Rainforest, and there's a bear that lives in this rainforest. It is the only place in the world that this bear lives. And it is what they call a Kermode bear, Kermode, Kermode bear. And it is a subspecies of a black bear. And a black bear is what we see here in Colorado. Most of the country you see black bears. Now, black bears can vary in color. Sometimes they're a light, like what the Parks and Wildlife people like to call a cinnamon color. Sometimes they're kind of a brownish color. Sometimes they're a black color. But regardless, they're a black bear. Brown bears are are also called grizzly bears. You don't see them here in Colorado. They're up in the northern parts of the country, up in Wyoming, like in Yellowstone National Park, Montana, up further north into Canada, things like that. They have very distinctive looks, and I found a really great picture during this week of the difference between a black bear and a brown bear or grizzly bear. So what makes this Kermode bear a little different is that it is a black bear that has white fur. Now, of course, the first thing somebody says, well, it's an albino bear. Well, it's not. There's a genetic change in their DNA that I think it's 1 in 20 black bears of the specific subspecies Kermode bears that have this white fur. And it's just this little genetic change, and it just changes the color of their fur. They're not quite the same thing. They're not anything else other than they're this bear with this genetic change that causes them to have white fur. They're not a crossbreed between a black bear and anything else you can think of. They're not a grizzly bear. They're not a polar bear. They're not a cross species between anything. They are a specific type of bear. The only place in the world that these bears exist is in the Great Bear Rainforest in British Columbia. Now, sometimes they are seen other places. There was one that was reported in Juneau, Alaska, which is quite a ways off. And I've heard reports of one seen in Michigan, but to be honest with you, I have not done the research to see if that was really one of these bears, because that's a very long way to go from British Columbia, which, if you're not familiar with that is the western end of Canada, all the way out to the to Alaska, basically, in the Pacific Ocean. So this trip was supposed to, I reserved this trip in July of 2019, and it was supposed to happen the following September. And as we all know what happened in 2020, take a guess, we ended up with the coronavirus and the pandemic. So that trip was put off from 2020 to 2021. Well, you know what happened then. We weren't quite past it yet, so that trip was then postponed until 2022. And it finally actually happened. I got an email a couple weeks ago, make your plane reservations, get your tail out here. We're going to be going on this trip. They've never done this trip for the public, if you will, until this year. And they've only done it 3 trips. So it was 3 weeks in September was the only time they've done it. And they've timed this to be the time when it would be most likely you would see this bear, and when the conditions would be right, mostly that the salmon spawn run would be coming, and bears come to the creeks and the rivers and the waterfalls to feed off the salmon. It increases your chance of seeing them. And these people know what they're doing. They've been actually studying this bear for many years. So they know what they're doing. They timed this just right. So finally comes around to happening. Originally, I was scheduled for the very first trip they were going to have in 2020. As it turned out, by the time they rescheduled everything, ended up on the last week's trip for 2022, the last one they were going to have for the season there, and not doing any till next year. And we're going. You get a letter, make your plane reservations. You're coming out here. We're going to get you on the ship. We're going to go look for these bears. And we're going to look at a lot of other things. There's a lot to see out there. I'll get into that in a little bit. So make plane reservations from Denver to Seattle on Southwest. Get off of there, get on an Alaska air flight to Ketchikan, Alaska, which is a quaint-looking little town, very tiny on the very southern. I don't say it's as south as you can get in Alaska and still be in Alaska, but it's awful darn close. And National Geographic and their joint partner in this, which is Lindblad Travel, named after Sven Lindblad, who is an adventurer from Sweden who initially started this cruise part of this business and then was partnered with Nat Geo, and they have both this part of National Geographic and Lindblad have been bought out by Disney, but it seems like they're fortunately keeping their hands off on it. We get to we get to Ketchikan. We get met by a bus. We go to a hotel. Our baggage comes with us, and from there, everybody gets a rapid 15-minute COVID test. You did have to show that you had your vaccines. There was a lot of paperwork we had to upload before this trip. And since we were going to Canada, they required some documentation. They wanted to see your COVID. They have an app. They have a really nice app. You scan in your passport, ask some questions, scan in a picture of your COVID vaccine card, and then you pretty much just breeze through customs when that time came. We went there, did a 15-minute COVID test, and then got on another bus, went to our ships. On the way to the ship, they took us by some Native American, I guess you'd call it a neighborhood there in Ketchikan, where they showed us some totem poles and things like that. Pretty cool. We were met there by some Native Americans, the tribes there, who kind of showed us around. They were very cool, and we learned a lot about the totem poles. Got on the ship and then set sail for Prince Rupert in British Columbia. And Prince Rupert's another real tiny town, a little bit bigger than Ketchikan, I believe. And this is in British Columbia. And it turned out that the day we landed in Ketchikan, the weather was gorgeous and beautiful weather. And overnight, we set sail for Prince Rupert Island, which is a good 8-hour trip down there. So it was all night with the ship in motion. These ships are very stable and be hard. And we were on the inland. I think the word they use is the inland waterway. So it was not like we were out in the open ocean. So pretty much I think what they call the inside passage. So it was very shielded from the ocean. So very easy sailing. Get to Prince Rupert, Alaska, a nice little town, and we spend basically the day there. We wait for customs to come on board. They go to the purser's office, and what happened in Ketchikan, we gave the staff of the ship our passports in case Customs Canada wanted to look at anything. They came on board. They just kind of looked. I don't know what they did, but they basically, looked at the paperwork. Didn't have to go through everybody's passports. Didn't ask to interview anybody. And boom, we were done. And we were allowed to go into Prince Rupert and and, hang around there for a little bit. It was a short walk up the dock to there. And we did take a hike, and they offered us a hike to a place called Butsy Rapids Interpretive Trail, which is pretty close by. And we were met by a guide there who, I guess he's kind of like, I guess you call him a volunteer for the provincial forestry people or Parks Department people there in British Columbia, and he took us around the trail and did a really great job of showing us a lot of the foliage and fauna that exists out there. And it was a good chance to get a hike, because it was probably going to be the last chance to get a real hike in. Not that we weren't going to be doing some walking, but get a real hike in. Again, beautiful weather. Even he was astonished by the weather. As opposed to 300 days of sunshine here in Colorado Springs, they get 300 days of rain every year. So they were not even used to it. It was warm, it was sunny, it was a beautiful day. Saw a lot of really cool, foliage, and we saw this giant sea slug. I'll have all these pictures eventually posted. I shot so many pictures. Spent the day there, and the next day we start heading into British Columbia to look for the Kermode bear, and then the Native Americans call it the spirit bear. As you can imagine, this is it's not the I guess the best way to call it is this is the primary reason we're there, but we're also there to look at other things. So the idea is we're going to go on our way to different places. We're going to go by where these bears are, and if we see them, awesome. And if we don't, well, they are a rare bear. The previous 2 weeks before us were out there and did not see the Kermode bear. On the 22nd, so I got there, I flew out on the 19th, and on the 20th we were in Prince Rupert, and on the 21st we were looking at these different fjords and just cruising. And on the 22nd, lo and behold, somebody up in the bridge spots a rare Kermode bear out on the shore. And as you can imagine, 70 people on this boat go running for the bow of the ship and outdoors, and it's raining. By now, this nice weather we had was over, and it had just been raining. And we are taking pictures of this beautiful white bear on the shore, looking for food, looking for salmon, which is basically the biggest thing they eat out there. And I will tell you, it was a sight to behold. It was really something to see this beautiful white bear. Kind of not paying us any mind. Now, when we see these bears, we're in the province of British Columbia, but we're also on what we call Native Americans. They call First Nations people, and we're on their land. The British Columbia, the Canadian government have turned over management of these properties back to the First Nations people. So we had a lot of specific places we were allowed to go, places we were not allowed to go, places we were allowed to go on shore, places we were not allowed to go on shore. They're very protective. So we're not going to go on shore. A couple of reasons. A, we didn't have a permit. B, the nature of these fjords, which are made out of glaciers that melted, are the water goes from very, very deep to shore to rocks. There's almost no shoreline almost anywhere. And that would also disrupt the bear. So we're doing everything from the ship. We're 1,000 feet offshore, I guess would be the best way to put it. So big telephoto lenses with extenders or teleconverters that help you extend the reach of your telephoto lens. And I got some wonderful shots. If you follow me on Facebook, you've seen those. I will get them on other accounts here as soon as I can. So it was a beautiful day out there. We got to see the Kermode bear. We saw a lot of other things, beautiful scenery. There were a lot of whales to be seen that they were hanging around. We would see a whale spout where it would just, you'd see water shoot up and we would see whales. They hung around with us for most of the trip. I should say hung around. We saw a lot of them on this trip. There were a lot of whales out there when we were either on the ship or out on Zodiacs. We went on Zodiacs a lot for just rides with the naturalist staff, or we went on shore to do a little hiking or I wouldn't call it hiking. You can get too far out there, very thick forestry, but, to walk around out there. So we got to see a lot of whales, but we got to see the Kermode bear. Awesome. It was a great day. It was what everybody came for. This is what Nat Geo advertised this trip for back in 19. This is your chance to see this rare bear on lands that most non-natives can't even go to without, jumping through a lot of hoops. So there's a lot of pretty cool stuff that went along with this. So we got to see the bear. It was very exciting. The next day we were at a place called Green Inlet, which was another fjord created by glaciers that had, melted many millennia ago, I guess the best way you put it. Saw some waterfalls. We had some great naturalists on board. They took us around, showed us different plants. The nice thing about these trips with National Geographic as opposed to any other regular tour company is the depth of knowledge of the naturalist staff. They are relatively young, but they have great amount of knowledge. They're highly educated. There are a lot of master's degrees on these boats. There are some PhDs typically on these boats. These are people who really, really know the stuff, years of experience, great education. So you get to learn a lot, not only about the in this case, the sea life you're seeing, the plant life you're seeing, but how it got there, what makes it exclusive to this area, why it's there and not someplace else. And then, of course, we have, the inter people who are also going to tell us about the native lands we see and the lives of the First Nations people. Now, unfortunately, there was supposed to be a First Nations person on board the ship with us for this trip who was going to really give us some insight into their lives, but unfortunately, that did not happen. Again, there was a lot of last-minute changes to the itinerary, some of them just days before we got there. And so that didn't happen. We did on one day get to go to one village. They only let us go to one village while we were there, a village called Kermode. And the First Nations people have what they call big houses and long houses. And these are gathering places. So we got to visit their big house on Kermode. And that a big house is like a gathering place where people meet, or they may have it sounds like the First Nations people play a lot of basketball. Probably the only thing you can play year-round up there with so much rain. And so that's what a big house is. They took us in there to show them these beautifully made, handmade totem poles that were in there, all of which have different meanings to them. And that was the only island that we actually got to land on that belonged to the First Nations people. The person who gave us the tour and talked to us was wonderful. He gave us a lot of information, answered a lot of questions for us, and it was a pretty wonderful experience. I would have liked to seen some more of their villages, but they are still kind of COVID wearing. So we had to wear when we were on this island, we had to wear a mask at all times. Which my word on that is whatever they want. It's their land; they get to call the shots, and they managed to get through a lot of the pandemic without any issues because they pretty much closed themselves from the outside world. They did have issues. I guess they eventually, got vaccines and everything, but they're really wary of people coming in from the outside and passing along this pandemic. So that's why we could not go to any other islands. But this one was very nice, beautiful. I shot some beautiful pictures of the totem poles inside, the outside of the building. Everything, when you see these totem poles or these drawings on buildings, they have very specific meanings. And if you look closely at them, you start to pick out some things. But, obviously having a native guide there really helped us kind of understand, what was going on, what we were looking at, the importance it has to them, what it means to them, how they're, why they're constructed that way. So it was a good cultural experience. Like I said, I would have liked to have had more of that in between doing other things, but that just wasn't possible. On the 24th, we went back past the same island where we saw the first bear, and sure enough, we saw another one. We were really excited for that one. This one was near a waterfall, so very visually stunning. And basically, this Kermode bear was on one side of the waterfall, and on the other side was a black Kermode bear. So we should make it clear that Kermode bears can be black or white. Most of them are black, the vast majority. Occasionally, they're white ones. So we got to see a white and a black Kermode bear. Now, they were never together, which it would have been a great picture to get. But we got to see a bear. So it was another wonderful day. I knew something was up because all of a sudden you hear the engines just stop in the boat, and then a call comes out on the PA that there's a Kermode bear there. And this one I was just getting out of the shower, so it took me a little while to get up to the bow and get pictures. The other interesting thing about both of these bear sightings is how long the bears hung out where we could see them. I had expected that if we even saw a bear, it would be for a fleeting, few seconds, and I'd be lucky to get a picture. And fortunately, these bears hung out on the shore looking for food. I guess being hungry, they would hang out wherever they thought there was a chance they could get some food. So they hung out there for a while and got lots and lots of pictures. I'm looking at my collection of my photos, and I shot way too many pictures. I obviously need to go through here and really be pretty brutal in my editing and throw out a lot of these pictures that are probably all duplicates, or some are not in focus or not composed properly. But in any case, we saw the Kermode bear again. So an exciting day. The second day, we see the Kermode bear, spear bear. Also saw bald eagles. We saw more whales. We saw a lot to see there. We went out on Zodiac rides to look at some things along the shore. Went onshore at a different island to explore a little bit. So we got to see all that. A very fun day. The final day, we kind of cruised. We're working our way back up to Prince Rupert Island from there, which is we're going to be our departure point. We were not returning to Ketchikan for the return. And again, went online. We saw a juvenile bald eagle, which I got a very good picture of, and a lot of other just really nice stuff. Stopping in these rainforests, and I will tell you, it rained a lot there, and I had some really good gear, which kept me very dry and made the trip tolerable. They do tell you in advance what to bring, and it's a good idea to go by their recommendation. It was never really cold, and the gear I had kept me from being wet. And they have a mud room in the back. You board on the fantail, the tail end of the boat. They have a place there for the Zodiacs to pull up to, and you get off and you get on and off the boat there. And so we were able to do that, and it was a short walk from there to my room, which was lucky for me. I didn't have to climb up steps with wet boots or anything like that. So that was the pretty much the gist of it. And that was on the 25th. On the 26th, they flew us on a charter plane from Prince Rupert to Seattle back to Denver. I think I woke up around 4:30 in the morning and got home at midnight with very little sleep in between. So as you can imagine, Tuesday, the day before I'm recording this, was a long day of a lot of catching up with a lot of things to do. Today was much of the same. Wednesday, and I'm actually recording this late in the day on Wednesday. But I want to make sure I stay with my schedule of getting these podcasts recorded on or released on Wednesday. So here I am doing this. I know I'm just barely skimming over things. So a couple things I want to say is the staff on board these boats are just wonderful. I had been on this exact same ship, I think I mentioned earlier, back in November, when I did a trip with National Geographic to the Channel Islands. I ended up being on this exact same boat, in the exact same room even. They even gave me the same room on this one. And some of the people were the same. The captain of the ship was the same on that trip and this trip. The hotel manager, they call it the hotel manager, basically runs the rooms and the dining area. She was the same person, very wonderful person. And the trip, the expedition leader happened to be the same person on both of these. So that was kind of like old home week. And they were like, "Don't we recognize you from someplace?" I said, "Yeah, I've been on the ship before." It was really, really cool. Really wonderful bunch of people. I can't say enough about how nice they are, how well trained and educated they are. The interpretive staff is just wonderful. And, they're just really a really great bunch of people. So it's been, it was a fun trip. Really great people to be there with and to learn from. The other guests on board were just great. Really had a good time with them. You really kind of come together on these things. One of the things they do on these ships they have a briefing every morning. You go to breakfast, then you start heading out for whatever you're going to go. Zodiac. You can also do stand-up paddleboarding some days, kayaking. You can go on shore if that's available and do a little expedition there. And everything's always with guides. Either on shore you're always with a guide, and if you're on a kayak or a paddleboard, then there's always somebody nearby. All of this stuff is going on there. And really, really wonderful people. I guess I can't say enough about how good they are. The guests were always great. We always had a very good time. And, you kind of come together in this. They do an evening where they call a daily recap, which is just before you go to dinner. Then after dinner, they have like a little educational presentation. And they did something pretty cool. I was kind of hanging around with the staff because I was the only person truly traveling solo on this trip. Most everybody, was there with a family member or a friend or something like that. So I was traveling solo on this trip. So I would kind of hang around the lounge, which also substitutes as the bar area, after dinner and after the presentation, and would chat with them. And the assistant expedition leader said, "You should do the recap one of these days." And I'm like, "Yeah, right, that's going to happen." And it turned out they did ask me to do the recap on the last day, which is supposed to be like, tell the story about what the day was like. So I actually told the story about what the week was like. I did record it, and I'm going to try to get that online on my YouTube channel, and I'll put a link to that when I get that. It won't be today. In any case, it was fun that they let me do that. I had a lot of fun doing it. It seemed to be well received by everybody. I can't say enough about the people at National Geographic. This was my 4th boat trip with them and my 5th trip overall. I did one to Yellowstone National Park just before the pandemic erupted and they stopped doing all those things. And that was the Yellowstone in the winter, and that was also a wonderful trip. So that's what happened this week. That's what happened. I'm saying that's what happened last week. That's what my week was like, and that's where I was. And I did have a podcast that went live last week, but due to some very limited internet capacity on the ship, it's done by satellite. It's very slow and it's very spotty in these fjords. The tall cliffs and mountains on either side block the signal, so I didn't get it posted onto the in some places till just a day or two ago when I finally got that posted. But it posted in some places, not others. But it did get done, and we'll be back next week with Kevin being back here. I believe we're going to have Kevin back, and we'll talk a little bit more about this, I'm sure. If you have any questions about the trip and what it's like to be on there and the Kermode bear or anything else, you know how to get a hold of me. Just go to hikingbob.com and click on the contact link there and send me an email or hit me up on social media, on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. I have all those accounts. Everything is linked on there. And let me know what your questions are or comments. I'd love to hear from you. But I'll just say it was the experience of a lifetime, and I couldn't have been luckier to actually experience this very rare bear not once but twice. And it will be a thing that, obviously memories are made of. And I hope to be sharing photos with you as soon as I can. But I've got a lot of pictures to work through. And with that, we'll talk to you later. And thanks for listening to the Outdoors Hiking Bob podcast.
Before you go, did you know you can rate and review our Studio 809 podcasts? That will help us because our egos really need to have thousands and thousands of listeners. But that helps our wonderful sponsors reach more ears too. And we do love our sponsors. So just go to Studio 809 or any individual 809 podcast in your iTunes or podcast app and click on ratings and reviews. Thanks.